Good evening, Mr. Baaghil. Well, it is in the UK at 9 o'clock. Now, my understanding is you're in Portugal. Is that
Ye-
right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
And
sir.
you're a much traveled, well, we'll go into your CV in a second. You're in Portugal, but you're a global brand relevance consultant. It's a
Yeah.
grand title. You're an author, you're a speaker. You challenge companies to rethink their strategy on understanding and reaching their target audience and how to build sustainable brands. You've got 30 years experience in branding and marketing, and you have four books, of which one of them is called The Power of Belonging, which is a very interesting title. Some call you the brand scientist. So I suppose my first question is, firstly, good evening, and hope the weather's great in Portugal. It's great here. Um, so the first question is, as the sort of brand scientist, is marketing a science or an art?
Marketing is a science because marketing has to impact the bottom line of a company. And science is what drives consumers' reaction. There's an art to marketing, and I'm not ignoring that. But also there's an art to brand. So what comes first, brand or marketing? Brand comes first. So brand does influence the whole art across the experience, where marketing is delivering the experience itself, which are the values. But let's say this: marketing drives a lot of the functional values, which are across the marketing mix: product, price, locations, and so forth. And there are like 40 P's today. But brand inspires the emotional side of the journey itself. So they both complement each other, but brand does empower the whole idea. And marketing is what delivers the value. So is marketing art? There's art to it, but there's a lot of it that is science.
Now that you've sort of answered the basic question, let me drill into you. Why did you feel that you needed to spend so much of your time concentrating on brand? What led you? Why did you think branding was that important? What led you down that route?
Well, basically, Mr. Ninder, the idea of brand, what led me to go much deeper into it is the misconception within the market today. Unfortunately, the fundamental is missed. People companies, big companies or small size companies also are rushing into what they call branding. Well, there's branding first, there's branding. The two did play a different role. And they still call it branding strategy. Well, it's supposed to be called brand strategy. So there's the fundamental side that's missing. And I became so advocate to push the understanding, the fundamental understanding of what brand is and what branding is and what marketing is. So because without the fundamental, how do you apply it? How do you, it's costly. How do you apply it? A lot of companies, even big ones, fail on this. I'm not going to just shed light on the smaller side ones or the mid-sized companies, even big ones. I mean, look in the past. Why did Coke come up with new Coke? I mean, how is that relevant? Or even Pepsi, how did they come up with Crystal Pepsi back in the early 90s? What does that mean? Crystal clear Pepsi. Even the naming, the positioning, all that reflects on the brand. But what happened back in the early 90s with Coke and Pepsi, the brand discipline was still in the early stages. And how do I know that? I'm a marketing graduate from the University of Maine. And for the 4 years that I spent in college, there was not even one class on brand that I took. It was very
Wow.
on marketing. Yes, yes, sir. So the brand discipline that we know today, that is because of the influence of the knowledge economy across the globe, which was started within the US itself, and the rights of the intellectual property is where the upper hand is on the consumer side today to decide what is it that's relevant to them versus what happened back in the trading era. Back in the 50s and the 60s, manufacturer would do anything they would like and sort of dump it in the market. The consumers would just have to buy it. The choices were a lot less. But now today we're left with a lot of choices, whether it's in the services, whether it's in the products, and with the only thing that would create that sort of point of difference is the brand. So the choice gives us the idea that, you know what, I'm buying into the value, or I'm going to buy into the values that address my needs. I'll give you an example. When you go to the supermarket, in some countries, the calories are enforced, other countries are not. So you would go to a country, if you're conscious about the calories that you consume, you would look into products that would add their value numbers, the calorie numbers, and you would pick a product that addresses the calorie over the product that doesn't. So that's an value added there. The brand that has that added value wins, absolutely wins. So who decides? The company? No, it's the choice of the consumer today. It's the choice that we are left. And we're able to make all sort of reviews because we own the digital sphere. That space itself belongs to us. We're able to dictate it, and consume, and the companies or the brands are the recipients to all sort of reviews. And based on those reviews, management and board are taking very critical decisions. So who's on the upper hand? We are as consumers. So should brand today dictate or listen? Brands should listen today.
So you're absolutely right. When I did my MBA many moons ago, uh, I remember studying the marketing subject, and I remember one of the P's being product, and I remember then being taught, by the way, within the product is the thing called the brand. But I've only started to notice the word brand, I think largely since social media has become more prevalent.
Yes.
And I think people have started to talk about branding and brand and the difference between brand and marketing. And unless I got it completely wrong and I was asleep in the class, I'm pretty certain brand came after they explained the whole marketing thing. But now
Yes.
you're saying the brand is important because the marketing follows the brand. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's the brand is born out of the business strategy, and marketing is influenced by the brand itself. So when you talk about marketing or even any of the communications such as PR or advertising, brand dictates the whole process. And second of all, sir, brand is not just a marketing arm. It goes across all business functions. HR champions brand internally. So because you have to onboard your employees to the values that you've created. And also one thing, also if the company does not have a culture, I don't see a successful brand because brand is built inside first before outside.
I mean, we're going to pick up the word around culture and leadership and branding. So, if branding is now, in your opinion, is where you start and the marketing follows and the brand becomes the key ingredient because, in your words, it cuts across all the functions, then why is it when you look at an organizational chart, you'll see a CMO, the chief marketing officer, but I've never seen a chief, unless I'm wrong, branding officer. And if you look in the UK, you certainly get very few marketing directors, and I've never seen a branding director. So, Bigal, if what you're saying is that it's inverted the other way around, practice appears to be completely the opposite, where they seem to be placing where they do marketing, but branding doesn't seem to be around. The literature might talk about brand, but the functional role is marketing. And in many cases, on board levels, you have no marketing directors of any sort. So why is that not showing in practice when what you're saying you've
No, but
articulated well?
because the evolution on the understanding is quite slow. You might see this on the founder stage right now in the tech companies kind of coming out of Silicon Valley and so forth. You would see the leadership itself leading on brand. Let me say something about the chief marketing officer. P&G, Procter& Gamble introduced 4 years ago a chief brand officer. And there was a whole argument, what would be the role of this chief brand
Yeah.
officer? Well, in fact, if brand is across all business functions, the responsibility of the brand is the CEO. It is the CEO who is responsible of the brand. And does marketing does the external stakeholders management of the brand, and the internal is managed by the people's officer and other functions, but people officer does champion the internal brand management.
So what you're saying is the branding function then sits right at the very top,
Absolutely.
right with the CEO,
Yes.
and therefore actually it precedes all the others. It leaps right to the top. And because you said it permeates through the organization,
Yes.
it becomes the number one important metric to look at. Is that right?
Very true. But let's bring something to light here. What marketing does is branding. What CEO does is oversees the brand. Most people call it branding. Branding is the action we do every day, every single second. Is the action that builds up the brand. So is there something called a branding strategy? No, there's something called brand strategy. Unfortunately, a lot of experts, practitioners, even chief marketing officers, even CEOs call it branding. And I don't understand why. You're supposed to call it brand. Branding is what we do. Brand is the idea that we hold in the minds of the audience with its distinctive values. So if I want to identify Apple, do I identify Apple through its cell phones or through the iPhones or the iPad? Those are brand signals, 100%. I agree, but that's the branding work. But how do I identify Apple? I identify Apple by the core, which is innovation, which is innovation. That's the brand. Branding is everything that we see, we hand, feel, and touch, like the shape of the phone itself, the Mac, and so forth. That is the actionable work that's done to create a meaningful value to us as audience so we can relate to the idea, which is the brand. Unfortunately, that's where also another fatal misconception in the whole entire understanding of what branding is. The same happened back in the trading era when people confused marketing and advertising and sales. We're literally living we're living the past and the present today when it comes to branding.
So if you were to summarize the difference between brand, the doing, which is branding, so where does marketing fit in? So how would you break those? So you've described the brand,
Yes.
which is sort of the core. You've described the branding, and you just give an example of Apple there. So where does the marketing fit in? So where does marketing fit in?
I can walk you through this whole entire journey if you don't mind. I think this will be great, so we can bring through your podcast
Yeah.
uh, clear understanding to the audience. So if we take Apple or Google for example, Apple worked on their brand and they decided that their core essence is going to be innovation,
Okay.
and purpose is to empower society and change how people use cell phones, laptops, and so forth. Um, so they had to create these tools that will deliver the idea. The tool itself are the functional, which is the marketing side of it, which are the products. Now, when you go through the journey to validate the idea of innovation and to make it reason to believe that the idea of innovation of the brand does exist, that happens when you walk into their stores. At that moment, when you start walking to the stores, that's where you're meeting marketing. That is marketing right there because you're meeting the person, you're feeding the product, you're looking at the price, all the marketing P's or the marketing mix, we call it marketing mix, it's there. But the question is also what guides the marketing mix internally to make sure that it delivers on innovation and it does have something related to the emotional side of it, like lifestyle, for example, so you can buy into the idea. And that's where we put positioning in the middle between brand and marketing, because positioning manages the whole entire marketing process. Without positioning, you'd be lost a bit on the idea, because what brand does, it defines the idea, it defines the business. What positioning does is create the idea around the marketing itself. So if I'm going into Apple store, so I can validate positioning, and I'm buying an iPhone. So I'm buying an iPhone. Do I really need an iPhone? No, I just need a cell phone
Yeah.
with all the apps. But why is iPhone relevant? That's where we come to relevancy consultancy, is because I am looking at a lifestyle more than a phone. So Apple fulfills that. And Apple's positioning is digital lifestyle. So my iPod, my phone, my Mac, and all that style with my big glasses, that fits the whole narrative that I create for myself. But the other question is that does Samsung or any other phone that Android runs operates on, do they fulfill that narrative of lifestyle? They don't. They're very much very functional. So if I go for a Samsung, it's because I need a smartphone. But if I go to Apple and get an iPhone, it's because I want.
Got it.
Yeah. So there's a difference between the desire itself and the need itself that also validates why that brand it is what it is.
Business to consumer products, because that's how people link it. And the word brand seems to be very prevalent in the consumer market. So I suppose the next question is branding largely a business to consumer domain, or really can you apply it to a business to business? Because it seems to be a business to business seems to be a lot more complicated in terms of the way the products are sold, because the variables are a lot more. Whereas with business to consumer, some people equate branding to lots of adverts, as many adverts as they see, the logo looks good. So, or do you think we should treat the branding exercise completely across the board, regardless of B2C or B2B?
Well, brand goes all across, so branding is going to go all across. What's going to change here between B2C and B2B? In B2C, you do use a lot of advertising. In B2C, you'll use a lot of PR, public relations. Advertising does not work very well with B2C, with B2B, sorry, because it undermines the power of the brand itself and it does not really hold well. But with B2B, PR delivers because in B2B, it's all about relationships. It's about creating that relationships. So that it could be in events, it could be in big events, it could be through a press, it could be through a story, it could be through many things. So PR does play a very important role in the brand building process. Uh, um, uh, PR plays a very important role in the building process as B2B. But when it comes to B2C, I like to use PR a lot on that. Why am I saying this? Advertising is relevant. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but advertising lost the credibility over the years. Unfortunately, not everything that they claim is true. And that happened not because of the companies itself. I think the agencies also that work on media and advertising, they've hurt themselves because what they did is over the years, instead of servicing the client, they're looking at the billing, how much the client budget, how big is it, and so forth. So, and then it comes the most critical part. Rather than helping the client to build up, it's like, okay, I got to give the client what he needs. Uh, but when you give the client what he needs, in most cases, the client does not understand that his claim is not true. Because when I claim something on advertising, I need to go, when I go meet the value itself, the value needs to be true. Or else what I've worked on will fail. So that's where advertising loses credibility in many ways. Now I think it's coming back because the discipline of brand has become much stronger, became very critical. So brand is very influencing advertising, which is one of the tools of communication, and it's optional. Most people think advertising is not optional. No, it is optional. Communication is not optional, but advertising is optional. So, but today we have so many sort of tools that help us communicate the value of the brand. Not necessarily that we have to really do Google ads and all that stuff just because we want to create traffic. What does that mean by creating traffic? If you don't address the proper segment, it means you're doing a lot of waste.
Picking up the word relationships, B2B, because there's so much emphasis now on relationships, is that why now the personal brand has become important? Because now people talk about personal branding a lot, particularly because of social media. What does your personal brand mean? And if your personal brand is high, the likelihood is the products you represent in the B2B are going to be shifting more because people see you more often, you're visible, they trust you more, there's a certain level of credibility. And so almost the word relationship and personal brand going hand in hand. And now what you see in the B2B space is a lot of people pushing their personal brand out because they're convinced even if they move organization, they take that personal brand with them and hopefully some business with them. And do you think that's why the personal brand has grown? And what is the importance, do you think, there is such a thing as a personal brand? And if there is one, and my second question is, if you're a startup, so I might be throwing too much at you, but if you're a startup, what do you push first, your personal brand or the brand of your business?
Okay, first let's put in perspective that we as humans we buy from people
Yeah,
naturally, whether we put us online or offline. People buy from people. That has to be the basic principle there. So in most cases, when we buy something online and we're not relevantly close to the brand of or probably heard of it for the first time in any of the social platforms or any space that we were on, the first point is you're going to go to Google to find the point of reference of this brand. What is the review? What are the reviews? And who's the company and who's the founder in most cases? Because you are trying to create relatability. Keyword there, relatability. If relatability does not happen in the digital world, everything pauses or stops. So I like the word relatability, especially that we're moving today from a macro market approach to a micro market approach. What am I saying? Back in the 60s and the 70s or 50s, there was one blanket statement for all. Even segmentation didn't matter. Today we're talking about small spheres all around that we have to address. So there's a lot of breakdown segmentation, not only because of demographics, but also psychographics. So in that case itself, when you have that huge breakdown, the most important point is who has the voice. So if I'm an online marketing company, I'll be the voice of that service itself, or else it's infunctional. That's why in Clubhouse you see a lot of digital marketing people creating rooms and trying to sell their services through something called funnel marketing. So they are the voice. They are the one that are creating relationship and so forth. Now the other side is when we think about startups, should the company come first or the voice? Well, we always buy into the value of the company, we buy into people. So I suggest that both of them need to come together. I mean, unlike when it was the time when Bill Gates created the software in Microsoft and it came in CDs and discs and so on, these are tangible. So did Bill Gates became first or Microsoft? It was Microsoft that built Bill Gates' brand. It was not the other way around. So is Apple. I mean, Apple's relevance was much stronger under the innovation process or innovation core essence of the brand. Prior to that, there's a story when Steve Jobs was fired and he's the founder of Apple. But the story or Apple's relevance was not as strong as Apple when it really went through the last journey and disrupted the world. But here's the thing: if it wasn't for Apple, if we have to scratch everything in Apple, would Steve Jobs have the same relevance or would have the same credibility as a personal brand? I don't think so. Absolutely not. So Apple did play a great role in any startup today. I think he should also put the balance between what is he and the value of the company is bringing and how that has a one single purpose that would change the world around. We buy into purpose. We don't buy into products. We buy into ideas. We don't buy into services. So today, for example, any startup that says, I'm building my brand. Okay, how are you building your brand? The startup says, well, I'm the voice and starts speaking about how he founded the company and so on. But in most cases, Ninder, they all get caught up in their own personal stories and forget all about the company they've created. So the whole goes to them, and then the company does not make money. So the question is, because you are the voice for yourself, your story, you're not becoming the voice of the company. So that's why I've always said, if you're a subject matter expert, carry the subject itself. Look, go much deeper into it. If the question comes in, for example, my company name is called Baaghil. I don't want to get confused. I don't want to manage two things. I just have to manage one. I don't have time to manage two things. So if I'm going to go on Clubhouse and speak about brand, or on LinkedIn and speak about brand, then I am the reference. The company name is called Baaghil, and I'm Baaghil. So one single journey, clear values that I share with my company as both functional and emotional values, and I'm delivering them. And my purpose is the same purpose as the company. We can no longer do two things. I absolutely don't think it's manageable. I think it's expensive to think about your personal brand and your company brand. I have a lot of those questions that come up on Clubhouse and also
Yeah.
LinkedIn. And I think it's a disaster. It's time consuming, financially it's draining, and at times, because we are attention seekers as humans, we overlap the company's values, we overlap the company's priorities, and put all that priorities and light on us, because we're so much attention seekers. I mean, look at Instagram, for example. I think Instagram created the attention seeker, where I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. That's Instagram. Look at my picture, look at my videos. So if you have to manage your Instagram page of your personal brand, and you have to manage your Instagram page of your company, these two, it's a lot of work, a lot of work. I just do one thing. That's it.
Okay, so if I pick that up, Baaghil, does it make an exit strategy difficult? Because if you wanted to sell your consultancy, that would be difficult, wouldn't it? Because I'm buying your name. I'm not. Does that make sense? And also, what if the next 5-10 years you build 4 or 5 different companies? How would that work?
Okay, but I have a great story here for you.
Okay.
I think the life coach, what was his name? Tony Robinson.
Yep.
The perfect example right there for you. The guy suffered selling his own company. He tried to do a lot of exit strategies, couldn't, because everything is reference to him, to his name.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. But look at, I'll give the counterpart to this. Elon Musk. Everything is built at SpaceX. And, all right. But who is the voice? It's him. Whose brand is it? It's him. I mean, Tesla has a name.
Yeah.
It's the brand, but it's not far more powerful than the brand of Elon Musk. If you take Elon Musk from the management of Tesla, and you say Elon Musk has an exit strategy, you lose half the value of Tesla tomorrow morning. So how much is which is the power?
No, but okay, listen, I 100% accept what you've just said. So is Elon Musk then? I accept that it's because of him Tesla's got to where it has, because of his personal brand. But how does he resolve then the fact that when he tries to sell it, he can't sell it without him, and if he does, he loses half the money? Isn't that, or is that just something you have to accept?
Something you have to accept. I mean, look at if Jeff Bezos sells Amazon, what's going to happen? Half of it. See.
But I think the exception to the rule, whilst I'm agreeing totally with you, was that when Jobs stepped down, he was very angry because the stock market didn't collapse. The stock market kept going, even with Tim Cook. So there was an example, actually, but I've just probably contradicted myself, where he built up such a brand, but when he left, the company still flourished.
I have an answer for you on that one too, but let me give you one key example. Bill Gates and Microsoft. If Bill Gates moved out, the value of Microsoft will never drop 50%.
Yeah.
Because Microsoft is far more powerful than Bill Gates. You know why? Because Bill Gates was never the voice of Microsoft.
No.
One voice. Now let's talk about Steve Jobs, like you raised. He thought that the moment he steps down, that the stock market would crash. Well, it wouldn't, because Apple was at its peak and was disrupting. Now, once Tim Cook took over the leadership, Apple stopped being disruptive. It became a more sustainable brand. It's just everything that's been created. And it makes a lot of sense, because honestly, you cannot keep on distracting unless you build up that sustainability.
Yeah.
Uh, but the thing is, if Steve Jobs didn't disrupt as much as he did and remained on top and worked on the sustainability, and then Tim Cook took over, the the stock market would have been hit. So he took that as a peak, the moment of his peak. When he went in, the brand was far more relevant than him.
Yeah, got it.
But they discovered that Steve Jobs was the disruptor after he was long gone when Tim Cook took over, and everything remained as is, and there's no disruption. We're not seeing anything new.
Right at the start of when we talked about whether it's a science or an art, and you said it's a science. So let me ask you. Sorry, yeah. So, and then of course there's a bit of art as well, but it is a science. So if it's a science, and I'm sitting on a board, and I sit on a few, and by the way, we never talk about branding and measuring branding. So I suppose that's why I'm going to ask the next question. I might even ask the next question at the board level: is how do you measure branding then? How if it's on an agenda, and if I say to the chief exec, listen, we need to have branding on the agenda, and he says, and then he'll say to me, well, or he or she will say, well, how do you measure it? What are we going to say about branding, and how can we measure it from where it was last year to where it's next? You know, you can see the confusion coming in. So how would you measure branding, and how would you keep track of that measure, whatever that measure is?
Brand is intangible. I mean, you know, if you're gonna measure it, you're gonna measure it on the equity itself. You measure the awareness from the time that you've started engaging the brand across all your stakeholders, and then you measure it across 3 years. How much did the brand contribute on your growth? I mean, it just cannot be just product by itself. It's logic. Brand plays a very important role. But the point is, you can never measure it if the management or the board fail to understand what the value of a brand. So if you don't understand the value, how would you understand how much contribution we put to the business? You wouldn't. You would always argue that's intangible. It's just sell your products. So it's the brand that contributes to the product. Now let me add something about to the board. So if you don't have a brand and you don't build up the equity, okay, which builds up the awareness across all your stakeholders, what would be the value of your business without the brand? Nothing. Because
I think the other way, yeah, I completely agree. And I think the way I would turn it the other way is the way boards do read it, is when they think of a major decision, big decision, somebody always somewhere on the board says, but how would it affect our reputation? And that's when you realize that what they're actually saying is, how would it affect our brand?
absolutely,
They
yes,
don't, but they don't use the word brand.
yes.
They prefer to use the word reputation. Now, as someone who sort of understands figures, I did my first degree in finance. The way I understand brand in a financial context is, if we're borrowing money from the bank will look at your balance sheet, but actually they'll look at your brand, and they'll look at your reputation and say, yeah, the balance sheet looks good, but the reputation's great. We can offer them the loan at a more competitive rate. Now, that's a backdoor way of saying we've got a good brand. And equally, if the banks are charging you a lot of money, I would say that's not only your balance sheet's a bit dodgy, but actually they don't trust you as a brand to pay it back and on time.
I think you've nailed it. Brand is if it basically is managing your reputation.
Yeah.
It's your reputation. It's bottom line reputation. You can, with your great reputation, you can build a great business. With a horrible reputation, you can destroy the whole business.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if you decided that you want to sell something, everything else is worthless. The only worthwhile is your reputation. It's the reputation of the business that people buy it. You know?
So back to my point then, we sort of both agree, but I'm just wondering, I know you're saying it's an intangible,
But it's very
Become,
difficult numbers for you on the balance sheet for the board, unless the board have a clear understanding on what the brand is, and what a brand is, and how brand contribute to numbers. The problem, and I've seen this across boards and management, a lot of boards. I was advisor to the Saudi Stock Exchange, and the argument always there was, I was a brand advisor.
yeah,
The argument always was, how do you convince the board? How do you convince the board?
yeah,
It never convinced the board on brand, because brand is a very new discipline, and the board decisions are always on P&L. So at the bottom, what's the bottom
yeah.
line? What's the bottom line? It's always about numbers, but they don't understand how brand contribute to those numbers. Because if they don't understand the science, how are they going to understand brand did contribute 50, 60, 70, 80% to this? I mean, let's take Apple, for example. The brand Apple itself, apart, is what dictated all these changes. If it wasn't for that brand Apple that was created, Apple would still remain fighting on the functional goods. They have computers, they have desktops, they have laptops, and so forth and so forth. So if I would buy anything from Apple today, what was it? What is something that worthwhile that I'm going to buy? It's the name. Other than that, everything can be replaced. I mean, look at Huawei. Huawei's phone look like Apple phones, like
Yeah.
iPhone phone. I believe they were the manufacturers, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong. I believe they were the manufacturers for iPhones in China for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, that's probably, there was a disagreement, I believe, and then that's how Huawei launched their brand. But everything can be replaced. The only thing that you cannot replace is your brand.
It's interesting, and we'll move on to the next question in a second. Is equally when the profit figures come out every quarter, every 6 months, the stock market goes up and down, and share prices of these individual brands. I think, and I can't prove this, but I think part of it is the results they're given, but also part of it psychologically. I think the analysts look at where the brand sits, and if the brand is still perceived as strong, then the share price probably corresponds with that. Now, moving on to so I think the answer, before I move on, the answer to understanding the value of brand at board level is, I think from what you're saying, we still need a bit of an education piece, because it's still a new discipline.
Yeah.
People are very versed in balance sheets and profit and loss accounts. They understand marketing activities and things. But I think, certainly in the UK, I can't talk about other countries, the brand is still misunderstood. People still don't understand where to put it on the balance sheet. And I think the only thing they think about when it comes to brand is reputation. But anyway, moving on. So as you're putting your brand strategy together then, because you said right at the start of a business, you should be thinking about your brand and then the marketing follows. How important is competition, or do you just completely ignore competition in putting your brand strategy together?
Well, unfortunately, what happens is people think about competition when it reaches to the marketing. Competition's relevance is when you work on the business strategy itself or your corporate strategy. That's where because corporate and business strategy both complement each other, and that's where brand comes as an influence. Competition comes within the core of the brand because you're identifying your core essence, your distinctive values. Is competition important? Absolutely. But competition is supposed to be, if I'm going to a certain sector as a brand and I'm new or I'm repositioning, I would not think of competition as competition, but I would think of them as someone I would come and disrupt the whole sector. Rather than thinking of who's number one and second, let me think about the sector and the generic values within the sector that all of them are sharing, and how am I able to change those generic values? That's what Apple did, and disrupt the sector and create a subcategory or a subsector that eventually, through brand and marketing, the point of reference would be my name, just like Kleenex or Coca-Cola, and so forth. So, is competition important? Absolutely. I don't think competition is a battle to fight competition, but it's the battle to understand who's there what values they have, and why are there, and what's their purpose, and how we can take over the whole entire sector and create a subsector that eventually that subsector would be the main sector.
Well, you've killed my next question, because my next question was going to be, if I'm bootstrapping a startup, how would you advise brands? Well, you've just answered that question, so it's pointless me asking that one. Now, here's another one. So Seth Godin, thought leader, said, and he was in one of our magazines, cover story, I think issue 3. He said, think about your brand carefully, make sure you satisfy your market well. Don't look at numbers, don't look at size, because he said 99% of people of the population will never hear about you. So don't spend all your time trying to spread yourself, because it's just never going to happen. If we take what he said, and you might accuse me of taking out of context, but if he says that, how important can branding be then, if you've got to accept that actually 99% of the world will never hear of you?
I think I like what he said, because it's something that I've always advocated on,
Okay.
that the focus should be driven. And we work in a world of segment. So, and like I said earlier, we're like small spheres everywhere. And segmentation is far more important today than ever in this cluttered market. I would suggest that I would echo what he said, but I would also focus more and narrow down to understand that you don't need the 99% to hear about you, because probably 60% of them are irrelevant. You need to be relevant to the audience that will respond to you. And I've always said this to my clients, Ninder. I said, your customer is not the one that you go for. It's the one that comes to you. The one that comes to you understand the value. He was buying into that value. But the one you're chasing, it's waste, because he's not your second. He's not responding to you. So if I'm in a relationship, Ninder, and I keep on asking this girl out, and she says, yeah, no problem. I'm busy this week. How about next week? So it goes on for the next 6 months. I mean, that literally tells me she's not interested. That's the same thing when you look at clients. When you approach a customer, or you go to an area that is not responsive, you know that that's not your customer. You move away from that and focus on the segment that is responsive. And sometimes we would try to stretch out the segment by offering the same value and then breaking down that value. I'll give you an example. iPhone, and it came with iPhone 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and all of a sudden they came up with iPhone S, iPhone RX, iPhone.
Yeah.
These succeeded as much as the iPhone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. I don't understand, why do we have to go to SKUs? We call them strategic SKUs.
I'm with you, by the way. I'm completely with you on that. Good grief.
It's a waste of money of trying to get a market share, and you know your warehouse is going to be filled with extra phones in there. Why go through that? Focus on what's moving for you and build on those values.
Yeah. Now we touched earlier, and I don't want to go into too much because we're running out of time, but you talked about branding being at the core. You spoke about branding should be owned by the CEO, so you shouldn't have a separate function. It's at the core, so it's got to be owned. And then you say it's not only the CEO, but it's got to filter right through the organization. And you did talk about the word culture, yes, and you talked about the focus on customer service. So I suppose the question to ask is, and by the way, I haven't met that many CEOs who think their role is chief branding officer. Just to let you know, I haven't met many. So how do you get an organization, in all the organizations you've met, let's try and be a bit brief, how do you get them, first to get the CEO to remember that he's chief branding officer, and how does he then infiltrate that and bring that right down into the organization? They understand that everybody in that organization actually is a brand leader and is a brand advocate. How do you do that? Because I don't think many people even understand that.
I face this challenge a lot with my clients, and I've always said this to my clients. I said, look, if you're managing the vision and the mission, and it's right there on your business strategy and your purpose, brand is there, because that's the only way you can achieve the vision. Without brand, you cannot achieve the vision. And in order for the vision to happen realistically, that means the whole entire organization, holistically across all functions, need to work together. And that the only way that would unite the whole organization is the brand, because it's right in the heart of the core center. Apart from the culture. Now, the culture is always a question because culture builds the body. Very true. Without the culture, you cannot host the brand internally because you'll have individuals. Culture is what unites people and to the purpose. Now, the brand is what communicates across all stakeholders, internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So when we say the CEO is supposed to oversee the brand, that's because he took the responsibility of overseeing the business strategy itself across all the business functions. If the brand does not go across all the business functions, then I would argue and say brand, okay, it's just marketing, but it's not true. Marketing is part of the role, but there's also HR, there's also finance, there's also many parts, supply chain and so forth. Brand does not start for marketing just launches a campaign. It starts if you're Ninder, if you're manufacturing a chocolate or a biscuit, the moment that gentleman that walks to the plant and turns the light on, that person that turns the light on at the plant at 5 o'clock in the morning needs to understand the value of the brand itself because it really affects the whole entire production line. You know, if you don't understand the value of the brand. So imagine if everyone knows the value of the brand across all functions led by the CEO, I think you'll have one extremely successful company and you wouldn't worry about the P&L because your bottom line will always be healthy.
Yeah. Last couple of questions. Does branding mean different things to different generations? So what does the word, I mean, so the reason I asked that question is the millennials and generation Z, do they see branding differently to an older generation like me? Do they see branding
Yes.
different? And if so, which brands will survive going forward?
I think Gen Z are the most aware of what the brand discipline is because it's more relevant to their time. Millennials understand, but not as much. I think my generation understand marketing
Yeah,
brand, or sales, let's say.
yeah,
But why am I saying Gen Z? Uh, there's a self-obsession today. Um, I more than we with the Gen Z. So personal brand plays a very important role here, and people seem to chase a lot fame than delivering the actual values. So there's a misconception of the personal brand itself. You and I are always in the clubhouse, and you see everybody's talking about personal branding, and sometimes I have to correct the word personal branding. Please call it personal brand, not personal branding.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
the Gen Z, I understand, but what scares me is they're so self-obsessed that they overshadow their own business. They are hurting their own business.
okay,
If you're managing, like we said, if you're managing your personal brand and your company brand, why don't you let your company brand build on your company brand because your reputation is going to come from the company brand. Focus on that. But what happens is that they're so self-obsessed that they chase their own fame. They think they're on a fast track. So they have to go post on Instagram everywhere and they always have to appear on videos and speak about themselves, show where they are, where they dined, what car they drive, and so forth and so forth. I made money from Bitcoin. I just bought a Ferrari and so on. And the business left out. This
yeah,
is your cash cow. This is what you
yeah,
have to do over the years.
yeah. So, okay, now final question then. We've looked at, we started with marketing, sales. We talked about actually how the word brand has been misused or not understood. We've understood now that actually the brand is owned by everyone. We're now worked into today. So from the past, we've come to today, and we've looked at how potential generations will see the brand. So finally, what does a brand need going forward to survive? Because of this change with social media, with the new generation looking through a different lens, with people making decisions quickly, with people deciding quickly on a quick visit to Google when they make a decision. They quickly look at peers, what peers are saying. They're looking at things like Trustpilot, which is, well, not the best thing you can ever come to. It's a complicated world, and brands are rushing and running to stay relevant. Three things that a brand should do to ensure that it has a sustainable future. So I'm talking about now, whoever's listening are going to be young people just starting out. There's going to be people who are currently in marketing and thinking, crikey, okay, I better get my head around this. And then we've got the CEOs who don't, by the way, until now, have worked out that their branding is their core activity. What three things should all of these businesses be thinking about to make sure their brand is sustainable for the future?
Perfect. Before I list the three things, let me say this. Ninder, today, if you're the CEO of an organization and reporting to a board, what you think of your organization and what the board thinks of your organization does not. But what matters is what Google thinks of you. Because within seconds, a million people are walking to Google just to find out who you are. And you're not able to reach a million people within a second. So the whole world has changed. So take that as a principle where your reputation is in there and how you manage that reputation. The first thing I would say, which I think is very critical, and if everyone is hearing this podcast, is that you need to understand the value of brand. You need to raise the bar. You need to educate yourself. You need to understand the difference between the science and art of brand, not reflect brand just on logo, which is the art side. That's just a static and building up on 30 seconds perception. Brand is a long journey. So you need to understand the science and how that science will deliver values to impact the organizational bottom line, since the board cares a lot about the P&L. That's the first one. So education and awareness is key, number one. Number two, leadership. I mean, brand needs to be championed. It cannot be just left to a marketing department or just one department that tells the other one, or your internal communication department or your external communication. No, brand needs to be championed by the CEO. So the second part, I would say the CEO needs to raise his awareness, because this is a critical responsibility. He's responsible for the make or break it of the company itself. And because he's directing the vision and mission of the organization through the business strategy, needs to add the value of the brand within the vision and mission itself, collectively as full responsibility across all functions. That's two. Number three, the everyday delivery of the brand consistently, whether you're an internal stakeholder and how you deliver that, or across your marketing mix, could be your products and so on. Brand needs to be consistent. I mean, if there is something that you've always championed and been known for, work on that, improve it, add value, generation change. Try to address the new generation by evolving the values. You cannot have something that was created 50 years ago to remain as is unless you evolve the value. I mean, I think the diehard of all this is the carbonated drinks. I mean, they're the most basic need ingredients that you can think and say, how are they evolving over the years? Is it just because they need to have a water and sugar product? No, it's not. They go. I mean, Coke's relevance is more sentiment than functional today. It's about making people happy and so on. So they're addressing the audience more of an emotional, where Pepsi at the same time is working on sponsorship and endorsements on their branding activity. So the third one has to be very strongly the consistency. You need to be consistent. And that's how you're going to build the greatest brand. And actually, I think if these three principles are applied, the organization will have a healthy brand. And like I said earlier, and like you mentioned, the board would eventually understand the value of the brand on how it reflects in numbers.
Nikhil, that this has been wonderful. We're up to the hour, believe it or not. The time has flown. It's been some fantastic stuff. We've talked about that branding is a science, but it also involves art. So it's art and science. We've talked about the difference between branding and marketing. We've talked about that the branding is at the core of everything you do. We've talked about that everybody needs to own it, from the very top, the CEO, all the way down to the very person who maybe only works a few hours. It needs to be consistent. And we know that going forward, because of the prevalence of social media, and you just said it, within a second, 1 million people through Google can see your brand quicker than you can ever say it. I think managing, protecting, and looking after your brand, I think now becomes the number one issue for not just the CEO, but everybody in that organization. Thanks for a really good breakdown. Thanks for a really good, insightful analysis of branding. And I think it's been fantastic speaking to you. Thank you for taking time out to explain it.
It was a
And
pleasure.
I'm sure at some point we'll get you back in when we look at how branding has changed again in what is a very fast moving and fast changing world that we all live in. Thank you very much for your time.
Honored very much, and it was a pleasure being on your podcast. And I look forward even for further work together. If we can raise awareness on brand, it's part of my purpose.
And I'll remind everyone that you've written a brilliant piece for the next issue of the Business Influencer magazine, and it definitely is worth reading. And I'm sure going forward we'll have some more great contributions from you, both for the podcast and certainly for the magazine. Thank you very much, and have a great evening in Portugal.
Have a good evening. Take care. Bye bye.